I'll call to order the council meeting for the Regional Municipality Appeal for Thursday, April the 16th, 2015. And roll call, all are present excepting, he just came in the door, Councillor Yanika. Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Miles, and Councillor Sato is on a personal matter. Mayor Jeffrey, you're on the board. I do have a motion moved by that I'd like to deal with before we go into the agenda. Moved by Mayor Jeffrey and seconded by Councillor Moore. I was going to ask if they could put that on the screen for everyone. If you just take a few seconds to read that. And then I have Mayor Jeffrey on the list to speak first.
I think it's self-explanatory, Mr. Chair. I'm just putting a motion forward based on the decision made by the Supreme Court yesterday, and the goal of this council to be a place that encourages everybody to participate freely in the public life and the meetings with their own beliefs. I'm supporting this motion.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Crombie.
Just in response to the Supreme Court decision yesterday, City of Mississauga did practice reciting the Lord's Prayer, not a generic prayer, but the Lord's Prayer, prior to each council meeting. And as a result of the decision, we will be abiding by the Supreme Court decision as well. I'm saying that on behalf of my council, but I see all the nodding heads.
Thank you. Mayor Thompson.
Well, personally, I see that. I'm disappointed and I don't support it. And I'll tell you the reason being is Canada was built on a Christian law that we've brought in. We've showed tolerance to all faiths and equality to everybody. And we've been leaders in this country. Anywhere in the world, people want to come to Canada. And I'm not about to erode something that are principles and are fundamentals for respect for mankind. And to me, that is what we're based on. That's our fundamentals that we're here. And if people don't, feel that this is depriving them, they can go anywhere else in the world. But I think we have the best country in the world, and it's based on these principles, and I'm not compromising them. That's my opinion. It's a personal one.
Yeah, thank you. I'll call the vote then. All in favor of the motion? Opposed, if any? To count.
Can we call a recorded vote, maybe?
You can. Yeah, you can call a recorded vote.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay.
On a point of order? Yeah, on a point of order?
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I'm a Christian and a Catholic, and I would recite the Lord's Prayer as well. But the implication is that in this vote, you are signaling that you're willing to fight this at the Supreme Court and undertake the financial cost, the burden there within as well. And I mean, I think the Supreme Court has spoken, and I don't think there is another avenue of appeal for that, Mayor Thompson. So, I mean, it was with great regret as well that we're going to make the decision we are making, but I don't think we want to undertake a challenge to the Supreme Court, and I'm sure if we could get some legal advice, there is no appeal or challenge to the Supreme Court. You're undertaking you are committing the region to litigation against the Supreme Court decision. Should we be challenged? And I'm certain we will be. May we have the...
Yes. Patrick, if you could confirm that.
We did take some care in framing the clause about the Supreme Court's decision to say that it significantly increases the risk that the region's practice would be found to be legally impermissible if challenged. The fact is that the Supreme Court decision does not actually bind the region in this matter until a challenge is launched against the region. We're drawing to your attention that with the Supreme Court's decision yesterday, that would be a considerable risk that the region would not be able to sustain its practice if it were challenged.
That said, the chances are we will be challenged, and you are now committing us to litigation against a Supreme Court decision in your vote. I mean, it is with great regret. I'm a Catholic. Of course, I would love to continue to recite the prayer prior to council meetings, but we have to respect the laws of the land, and the Supreme Court has spoken.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sprovieri.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would say I would put these people to the test. Let whoever is offended by this prayer that we're reciting here at the Region Appeal, let them. It's not the Lord's Prayer. It's a very generic prayer. I don't see any fault with this prayer that we're reciting. It's not. It doesn't reflect any of the religious denominations. It doesn't speak about. It's not a Christian prayer. It's not a. It's a very generic prayer. To me, I don't see any problem with this. And let us see. Let's challenge anyone to come here and challenge us that what we're doing is wrong. And I want to see who's going to be challenging this region and this council. I want to see someone come before us and challenge us. And if they do, and they have a good explanation, a good motive, then we can decide to remove the Lord's Prayer. Until then, not the Lord's Prayer, this prayer we're reciting here. Until then, I'm going to support keeping this going until somebody comes here and challenges us.
Okay,
and I want to see who's going to be doing that.
I think you've made your point.
Okay.
Councillor Tovey.
Yes, thank you very much. I learned when I was a very young child that I should never disagree with my mother. I should always do what she tells me to do. If I didn't, she got a broom. And we are creatures of both the provincial and the federal government and the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm a Catholic myself, and I am going to continue and sit at my seat at this council chamber and at the council chamber in Mississauga, and I'm going to recite the prayer before I start work at these council tables. Nothing can take that right away from me. But I believe for us to take taxpayers' money and spend it on a fruitless pursuit is just not responsible. So I'll be voting for the motion.
Okay. Thank you. Mayor Thompson.
I hear where my counterparts are saying, and I hear them loud and clear, but I think the bottom line is sometimes we have to stand up for the right thing. You know, look at what we did with Family Compact a number of years back. I think it's about fairness and standing up for what's important. I understand where you're coming from, but I think some of us want to show discontent, and I just fundamentally just don't support it because I don't believe in it. But I think it's really interesting that it comes from Quebec, where people can't advertise in English, promote their businesses in English. It has to be strictly French. You take those rights away, and now they're telling us this? Well, I'll leave it alone. I'm going to say the wrong thing. Thanks.
Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's unfortunate that it has come down to this, that the Supreme Court does not respect the right of everyone that lives in this country. I think this country, the greatest thing about it is its diversity. And I will be supporting our mayor on that position because I too don't believe that this is the right thing to do. I was raised with a very strong faith, and I'm not ashamed of it, and I will continue to be proud of it. So I will not be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Parrish.
Well, first of all, I want to go on the record as saying that generic prayer sucks. I don't like it. I'm not a particularly religious person, but that prayer is terrible. Number two, I think we should be separating places of worship from places of work, and that's pretty much what the Supreme Court said. This is not a place of worship. This is a place of work. And the idea that Christians founded this country, so what? We're getting overwhelmed and overnumbered by people from other countries that don't particularly agree with our religious connections. Fundamentally, it's the Supreme Court. We're here making laws and upholding laws. We cannot defy the Supreme Court. That is the ultimate hypocrisy. You're going to encourage everybody out there to defy the bylaws we're bringing in. Why not? I don't agree with it. And my tradition is I go through red lights. So this is really a moot discussion, and I wish we could just call the vote.
Well, I've got a list.
Yeah.
And
Just
with
a point of
respect.
clarification.
Mayor Crombie.
Just a point of clarification to Councillor Sprovieri. The council in Saguenay was reciting a generic prayer, much like our own. It wasn't the Lord's Prayer. So if the Supreme Court in their wisdom deemed that inappropriate, then I don't think they would support reciting the Lord's Prayer.
All right. Councillor Sprovieri.
Well,
and then we'll
Mr.
call-
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, I can't figure out the Supreme Court of Canada. They've ruled that our society, we must provide place and time for the Muslim community to recite their 5 times a day. They have to do their prayers, which is fine, and I commend them for doing that because it's a very dedicated group of people. And they have the right to have their prayer in the place of work, in the place of, in the schools, wherever they are, they have that right. The courts have given them that right, that we have to provide that ability for them. So if the Supreme Court, if the courts have ruled in favor of the Muslim community, which have come here like everybody else has, then I can't understand why the Supreme Court of Canada would have a double standard to say that it's okay we must give the Muslims a time and a place to worship 5 times a day, but it's wrong for this council to recite a generic prayer.
Well, with respect,
at the
Councillor
start of the
Sprovieri, I don't think
council meeting.
this is the forum to debate
Yeah.
that point, but your point's well taken.
All right.
Recorded vote has been asked for by Mayor Thompson. Please rise those in favor of the motion as you see on the screen.
Councillor Carlson, Mayor Crombie, Councillor Fonseca, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Ionica, Mayor Jeffrey, Councillor Mahoney, Councillor McFadden, Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Miles, Councillor Moore, Councillor Parrish, Councillor Raz, and Councillor Tovey.
Those opposed?
Councillor Downey, Councillor Groves, Councillor Innes, Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Shaughnessy, Councillor Sprovieri, Councillor Starr, and Councillor Thompson.
The motion
carries.
The motion carries. I would ask, since this motion's been passed, that we observe a moment of silence in memory of former Councillor Whitehead. Thank you. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, approval of the minutes of the April 9th, 2015 Regional Council meeting. Moved by Councillor Miles, seconded by Councillor Groves. All in favor? Carried. Approval of the agenda, moved by Councillor Ionica, seconded by Councillor Paleshi.
Chairman, a question on the agenda? Just for the benefit of the audience and myself, I see that under the in-camera, we have a closed session report on water fluoridation from the committee. Welcome. Why is it that it's in camera? And there must be an explanation, but I want the audience to know for the sake of there's probably good reason, but every other time we debated it in public. So if we could just give the audience an explanation as to why.
I'll ask the clerk to explain that, please. Thanks.
It's the in-camera minutes from the committee where they were discussing personal items in connection with identifiable persons.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Fair enough. Okay, the motion is that the agenda for the April 16, 2015 Regional Council meeting include an additional communication from Stephen Zakem, Airden Bayless, barristers and solicitors in respect to a letter from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing regarding request for provincial development facilitator to be dealt with under items related to Public Works item 12.4, and further that the agenda for the April 16, 2015 Regional Council meeting be approved as amended. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. That moves us to our first delegation then, which is Mark Scheller. Mark, if you'd come forward and address council, please. And welcome.
Good morning, Regional Chair and members of Council. The intention of today's presentation is also to connect to a report in your agenda on the flood adaptation work plan we've been working with at Region Appeal. I thought there was we needed to have a bit of a presentation just to go over for the newer members of Council some of the plan that was originally developed in the past term and to go over some of those issues. I think it's important to understand that our sanitary sewer system today is well maintained and it's operated as it was intended. There have been some challenges over the last few years, even going back even into the 1980s, when we've had some very intense storms that have exceeded the old storm number of Hurricane Hazel, which was the 100-year storm, which you'll constantly hear about in the industry. This is something, these intense storms that we're seeing, primarily due to climate change, we believe, have very distinct impacts on localized areas, not only in Peel, but right across the country. And the approach we've taken to this point is to look at block by block within the community how the stormwater is getting into the system, how can we keep it out, and if we can't keep it out, how can we convey it through our existing system. We've been working quite extensively, certainly with the area municipalities and the conservation authorities, to look at opportunities on trying to mitigate the amount of damage that we've been seeing, certainly on the floods that we've had over the last few years. I just want to go over, take a bit of time to go over what our plan has been. In last year, we had a voluntary incentive program on the east side of the region for homes that were predated 1975, because typically the house roofs were connected to the foundation drains, and the building code back then allowed that foundation drain to be connected to the sanitary sewer system. Over time, the building code changed, and the stormwaters and most foundation drains and roofs are connected to the storm sewer system or separated by a sump pump in the home. The results we saw from phase one were quite low. We were only seeing, a few hundred different, we had about 896 disconnections. We were hoping for close to 30,000 because there's about 63,000 homes that are being impacted. In talking with councillors, over the last year, a lot of them were indicating that the rebates seemed quite low in comparison to some of the other jurisdictions. I think the important thing to realize is Peel does not have a combined sewer system, so some of the other jurisdictions that were offering significant rebates had significant problems where we typically haven't had that in Peel. So, but to address some of that issue, we've decided or recommended to the council now is that we take that $75 rebate for the downspout disconnection and increase it to $100. It's not a lot, but at the same time, when you apply that $100 rebate across 63,000 homes, it's $6.3 million in rebates. So it is quite significant. We've decided we'd like to continue with the backwater valve rebate program into phase two. Primarily, it's giving some incentive to some of the residents that have had flooding, and the rebate was really for those pockets that had seen significant flooding before. Certainly, the insurance industry now is looking at forcing residents that have had previous flooding to put in backwater valves. We realize it does not pay for the whole cost, but we think in discussions with the area municipalities as well, we think it's something that the residents should take on their own to protect their own homes and property, and it's an incentive which will at least help them to get there. We've added a lot of additional works to try to keep the stormwater out of the system. One of the areas that we've certainly identified is the sanitary manhole systems that are in low-lying areas, certainly within tributaries. We're seeing a fair amount of water is getting in during those high-level storms when you've got overland flooding. So we've started to plug and seal some of those lines. We've done about 260 manholes quite quickly, more on the streets. We identified, though, that really to do the tributary ones properly, we've got to go in and seal the manholes completely. So that's going to be a much larger capital construction program that we're implementing this year. Some of the other things that we've looked at, we've changed our design standards. Certainly in the older areas, most of the sanitary sewers were 200 millimeters or 8 inches. And as part of our State of Good Repair program, we've been going in as we've been needing to replace, upsizing those to 250 millimeters or 10 inches. There is some flexibility for us to go in and start increasing capacity in some of the older areas where possible by upsizing the sewer. It doesn't get rid of the stormwater issues we've got, but it helps convey it out of the area a little easier. So that's why we've been focusing more on the flood-prone areas to try to put our improvements into those areas first. And then the ultimate solution, and there's been lots of opportunities we've found in different wards, the way the systems have been designed over the years, and which they should be, is you have series of subdivisions flowing through other subdivisions. That's just the way the system is designed. It's quite often that bottom end subdivision that's we've seen getting the bulk of the flooding. And it's been more on the east side, but there's also parts of Peel Village. There's also parts in Bramalea that have seen that type of flooding over the years as well. So where we can't get the flow out of the system, we've been looking at diversion opportunities to take the flow from those upper stream subdivisions, where possible, move it into the sub-trunks and the trunks, which typically have not been surcharging. And by doing so, we free up additional capacity in those lower-lying areas that have seen that build-up and flow. And I think the most important thing we've been doing, it's a new collaborative approach amongst the cities. We all own this issue. Unfortunately, Mother Nature has changed how she's dealing with us. And a lot of the designs that were put into these systems years ago were never designed to accommodate this type of stormwater flow. And I'm sure your staff are telling you that at the area municipality level too. But through collaboration, we're focusing on specific areas collectively. So when Mississauga or Brampton goes in and starts doing improvements, we're there doing improvements at the same time to our system, along with the conservation authorities. There's a lot of studies ongoing right now, certainly at the conservation authority level and area municipalities. And it's our collective effort which will help minimize the impact. I'm not saying we're going to eliminate flooding in the future, because it's really about those more intense storms. But at least we're collectively working together to minimize it. So I want to go over it. So when we keep talking about pre-1975 constructed homes, I just wanted to give you a high-level sense of the areas that have typically been impacted. The clusters of green are your pre-1975 home construction. You'll see there's a lot in South Mississauga. Malton certainly stands out to the east. There's small pockets in Bolton up on the north and south hill, and there's parts in the older part of Brampton. When we talked about the 63,000 homes that most of those green dots make up, when we went into the voluntary incentive program last year, we decided that we didn't have enough staff to deal with even that incentive program, so we sort of split it to the east side of Peel. And the reason we split it to the east side for 2014 was that's where we primarily have been seeing the flooding for the last few years. Last year we were very fortunate. It decided to pick Burlington and other parts of Toronto. We didn't see those intense storms that we had been seeing, but it just shows that those storms can happen anywhere. So our goal is eventually to cover all the areas that we have the potential for flooding and go in and start doing detailed analysis to determine how we can minimize the impacts. This year, we're talking about rolling into phase 2 of the program, was more the westerly side of Peel. The message we want to send to residents, and we're asking for to be accommodated in the report as a recommendation, is this program really needs to be mandatory. And all the other municipalities have gone through this process of voluntary with incentives, but as you can see even from our numbers, the incentive program really doesn't work unless people know that down the road it's going to become mandatory. It's about helping them protect their own properties as well. And this is one of the easiest ways to do it. So I thought I would just bring up just a simple house connection showing this is the type of connection that was allowed under the building code pre-1975. Where the downspouts coming off the roof went into the foundation drain, which ended up in the sanitary sewer system. Part of the problem that residents don't fully understand is quite often they're even self-flooding themselves during these large storms because there's so much water coming off the roof. One of the big things that you hear about in the industry is talking about LID construction, low impact development. Really, by taking those downspouts out of the foundation drains, it's acting very much like an LID system where the water is actually returned to the lawn versus into the sanitary sewer system that eventually causes surcharging. Even now, with the storm sewer connected to most foundation drains, when those storm sewers go to overland flooding, it actually surcharges and pressurizes the house foundation. So we've been having a lot of discussions with the area municipalities on that. One thing that we really haven't done in current designs is to deal with the overland flooding. And when we have water flowing down the roads as part of the normal stormwater routes now, we have to do a better job in sealing up the sanitary system. But the biggest area of connection right now is the homes themselves, pre-1975. The cheapest method of dealing with some of the stormwater surcharging is to get those downspouts disconnected off the system. And that's why we've really been promoting, same as all the other municipalities, have really been promoting voluntary to going to a mandatory program. So we're hoping that we can get your endorsement in a mandatory program to commence in July 2016. Our intention would be to bring back another report in the fall after we have more discussions with the area municipalities on how we start dealing with grading around lots and trying to deal with that extra flow that we're now going to be putting back out on property. One thing we have done is we've created some additional incentives or recommending incentives for seniors with low income and also people with disabilities. And we were talking about having that rebate up to $1,000, which will allow them to actually go and hire somebody to do the downspout disconnections versus many homeowners doing it with the parts we're supplying as part of the rebate. That was some of the feedback we were getting from some members of council that we put into this plan. The other thing that we've tried to do is we need to go back and have a more detailed discussion with condominium complexes and townhouses. They don't necessarily have the necessary expertise to deal with that on the private side, and we've recommended that we go back and hire external resources to go back and actually meet with some of those condo units and able to help them understand how they can possibly disconnect, and if they can't, how we can actually set up an exemption for them in the future. One of the biggest things we're hearing from residents was, and certainly in the more compact areas, is if I disconnect, I start creating unsafe conditions with icing. We don't want to create that either, and those would be the areas of an exemption under a new sewer use bylaw, but it's about targeting and getting those down on paper in a bylaw and then bringing it back to council in the fall of this year. So I'd be more than prepared to take any questions at this point.
Just before I go to the list, Mark, what's the communication plan with respect to the homeowners?
Well, that's one important thing that we raised in the report as well. It needs to be more focused. Part of what we'd like to do is go back to the areas of Phase 1 and saying, look, we're extending it into Phase 2 till July 1st, 2016, but indicate we're going mandatory. You can still take the incentives now, but I think we have to do a lot more with homeowners to talk about how they can also protect their properties as well as we need to be out there certainly a lot more talking about the benefits of the downspout disconnection program and more about the mandatory program. So there needs to be a whole new communication program developed around that.
Would it be possible, Mark, to insert some form of message in the water bill?
Yes, that's one method.
Okay.
And there'll be a series of different ones that we'll be using.
Good stuff. I'll go to the list then. Councillor Tovey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. That was sort of one of my questions. Last year, we tried to do a disconnect day down in my ward, so we hand-delivered notices to everybody, and I had all my tools, and we were just going to go out and disconnect everybody's downspout for them for free. And I had a group of local guys who are all familiar with construction. I've disconnected hundreds of these things, really, when I worked on construction, and it's really a simple process. So we did an entire area, I don't know, about 250 homes. We got zero response from the homeowners. So it was like, okay, and they all got sewage surcharging in July 8th of 2013. But it's amazing to me how fast people go back to sleep, you know. And a lot of the people that did have the sewage discharge, we disconnected them, and I helped some of them with that, and that was fine. But everybody that was uphill from them had absolutely zero interest in doing it. So I really do think you're spot on. We've got to be a little stronger on this, and to the chair's point, I think the communication piece is going to be very, very large to make sure that we get that message out. Just a quick question. So, the entire south of Mississauga most of it is connected, is connected that way, which is not appropriate. But do we have any idea what types of overland, how that's going to increase the overland flow? Because typically 90 years of the 100-year storm that's our path. It's the overland flow. So I'm trying to get my brain around, okay, well, if we do this, how much do we actually increase the overland flow during large storm events, particularly given that there's so much redevelopment going on in the south. So I'm constantly getting 800 square foot roofs replaced with 3,000 square foot roofs. So you've got a tremendous amount, like triple the amount of water coming off the roof structures as well. So if you could comment on that.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Tovey. So we've been doing a lot of work with the area municipalities and certainly the conservation authorities. Overland flow is a big problem. Mm-hmm. And, I guess the challenge we have is we would prefer it not be in people's basements. Yeah. So there's a lot of work being done, certainly at the area municipality level and the conservation authority level, trying to understand how to get rid of that total overland flow capacity, and that's of some of the tributaries as well. So there's a lot of different works going on right now. There's a specific study going on in the Malton area with the Conservation Authority and the City of Mississauga and ourselves, because Malton was a little bit unique. It wasn't that the tributaries overflowed, the flow from the community couldn't get to the tributaries.
Exactly.
And that's happening in different spots across all the area municipalities. So there's a lot of work going on there. I don't think there's a solution yet, but there's been a lot of work looking at overland flow and how do we deal with it. When you create a lake, and Malton was a good example of a lake, and certainly down in the Cooksville Creek area and parts of Bramalea, it's very hard. It wants to go to the lowest point of the system, which is unfortunately the sanitary sewer system. So we're trying to keep it out of there, which will hopefully keep it out of people's basements.
Interesting. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Fonseca.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I would have to agree that the education and the communication is an essential aspect of this, and how the next steps, and how everybody working together, the local municipalities, the region, and the conservation authorities will be working together. I'm actually attending, put together a downspout disconnect education session tonight, a workshop from 7 to 9 with the TRCA, with the SNAP, the Sustainable Neighborhoods Action Plan, so in the Burnham-Thorpe area. We've done a number of these sessions, and I think the education component and how you walk through that, or go through that with the different neighborhoods, is very important. And I do want to thank you thank staff, but also council last term in approving a neighborhood by neighborhood approach, because I know in Ward 3, just in Ward 3 itself, by going neighborhood by neighborhood, you see how the combination of the water entering into the sanitary combined with the overland flow issues had impacted different neighborhoods in Ward 3 itself differently. So I think continuing on with that is extremely important. Just a few comments on the subsidies. So I've found in Ward 3, a lot of the residents have already, there's neighborhoods that have been flooded. Yes, they were flooded substantially in 2013, but also 2009 and 2005 and 2004. And they are no longer covered by insurance. Even they're finding, some of them, because of the flooding in 2013, they had already put backflow valves in. And so they're frustrated because they are, and this has to go into the communication as well, the frustration and the education. The frustration is that they've already, on their part, tried to do a number of different things to protect their own, to protect themselves. So I had mentioned to you with regards to the different, the neighborhood by neighborhood approach, and you talked about the importance of sealing the the importance of sealing manholes, the diversion of just the disconnection of the downspouts, low-impact development. I had asked if for the public information sessions, if we could have some sort of data in a chart form that shows, by sealing the manholes, this much water is taken out of the system is going to protect your home in this way. By disconnecting the downspouts in this neighborhood, you're diverting, and there's this percentage of a chance that your basement won't be flooded. I don't know how to word it, but because the subsidy, in all reality, I mean, I recognize that there's a lot of homes. It's a big subsidy when you look at the entire region, but house by house, it's costing a lot more for residents to disconnect. It's costing somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000. Now, if they're like Councillor Tovey and they can just do the whole thing themselves, maybe a little bit less. But it is more than a couple $100s to disconnect their downspouts, and they're doing many other things as well. So I think to show that by showing that diversion and how that is going to protect residents in another format, rather than just telling them that they need to do this, that has to go along with the mandatory message, because many people have already done it. Yes, there are some residents that haven't, but there are many that have, and they continue to have basement flooding issues. So from there, the message from them is, well, we're not able to get covered by insurance. If there is another large storm, or even if there's not a large storm, if there's multiple rainfalls in a row, like this past weekend, I was on alert the entire time because we had 3 days of rainfall. It wasn't like 2013, but it was enough water that, I'm waiting to see what's going to happen in certain neighborhoods. So I think that has to come out in the public education system, or the public education next steps. There has to be something that shows this is what we're doing on the city side, and the local municipality, this is what we're doing on the region side, and the conservation authority side. And everybody coming together. The other thing you mentioned, I think it is essential. I have with regards to condos and exemptions, I have a number of condo and townhouse complexes that did, after 2013, they took the time, they spent, anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000, depending on their condo board. They made the decision that everybody had to disconnect, and then they've experienced more flooding, and that's a big issue unto itself. And I think it was they jumped ahead too soon, not knowing and not understanding the whole system. But they were trying to, in good faith, do whatever they could to protect those condo members. So I think that's something that having that exemption, or having a process in place for an exemption, it might be a neighborhood, it might be just for condos or townhomes, but I think we have to have that in place as well, because not only for the safety for pooling of water in the winter, but also with internal drainage systems within the townhomes and the condos. From a technical standpoint, there's been a lot of issues with that as well, which I know you're aware. So, and I really appreciate that staff have gone out and talked either with residents individually or within a neighborhood or within the condo complexes. I think that's the only way that we can move forward in terms of a mandatory program. And I had one last question with regards to insurance, and you mentioned that insurance, they are basically, residents don't have a choice but to install backflow valves. Can you mention, I'm not sure, I know there's something coming forward with regards to the last program. I don't know if anybody can mention anything about that right now, and if that will be helpful for homeowners in terms of looking at who they can, when residents go and look into a plumber or look into having their system and their whole house looked at as far as the whole drainage system, they've asked for, is there anybody that you can as a municipality recommend? And our answer is we can't direct you to one specific person. That's a conflict for us to do that. But this program through the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, I think, is going to be helpful for homeowners. So I don't know if you can comment on that at all.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with that program that you're talking about right now. Typically, when people are wanting to do a sort of a household drainage survey, we're recommending that they use a plumber. Mississauga typically recommends they be a plumber licensed by Mississauga. But we've got somewhat of an agreement, you know, with the area municipalities, that as long as a plumber is doing the investigation, that's licensed and respectable, that's probably the best way to go. I'll have to look into the program you're talking about with AMO. I'm not quite familiar with that one.
Okay.
Councillor Fonseca, David just has some comments he'd like to add to that.
Just on the, through you, Mr. Chairman, on the LAS program, it's a Service Line Warranty Canada program that's being adopted by some municipalities. We will be reporting back to council on that. It's an insurance program that provides insurance to cover the costs, or a majority of the costs, of collapsed laterals. So it wouldn't work to serve the purpose that you're suggesting. It wouldn't be a referral service for other plumbing issues. The way generally it works is if somebody buys into the insurance program and they have a problem, they call the insurer, and the insurer will send out a licensed plumber to fix the problem. But it wouldn't work as a general referral, like a Better Business Bureau kind of approach.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Raz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Mark. I note that there's a lot of green dots down in Ward 2 in the south. Just to follow along the lines of questioning from Councillor Fonseca, if we go to the mandatory program, when do you anticipate that's going to happen?
July 1st, 2016.
Okay, so what's the incentive for homeowners to spend upwards of $1,000 to $3,000 to get this work done if they know that a mandatory program is coming down the pipe?
So right now, there's lots of different costs out there. The general homeowner can probably go out, if they're handy, can go out and disconnect their downspouts, as Jim says, for $25 a piece.
You've never met my husband. Handsome, not handy.
I can
Sorry,
come
Mike.
and help if you'd like. And so will Jim. Generally, most of the parts that we're talking about are available at most hardware stores, and they're relatively easy to do. But there's lots of cases where residents have got extensive landscaping, and it becomes more of a challenge. We were hearing prices up to $1,000, and sometimes you can get more if you have to relay your eave troughs. We're just trying to do the basic disconnect. When it starts getting so unaffordable that it can't be done, that's when they're saying, what we're trying to say as part of our exemption plan, as part of the bylaws, it doesn't make any sense for you to do it, and maybe we can put up with some of that additional flow coming into the system. You know, the bigger challenge is, what do you do with all those foundation drains that are still connected from those 63,000 homes that are still connected to the sanitary? We know we can't really effectively deal with that because the cost is tremendous. So all we're really asking residents is just get your disconnected downspout off. That'll help. We really can't go in and deal with the existing foundation drains. We could, but that means separating them out, putting them on separate onto a sump pump and discharging them separately, which is a massive cost to residents. So we've taken the simpler approach to try to get the water off the roof at least. Mm-hmm. So for the incentive program, we're still trying to keep it at $100. I guess the point is, if you don't take the $100 now, we're going to force you to disconnect later, and potentially with a fine or penalty, which we'll bring back to council for that discussion in the fall.
Okay. And I'm also very keen to get working on the communications on this, because now is the season. By the time we put anything out, it's going to be 1 to 2 months down the road. So people want to do this work typically in the spring or summer or the fall. So if we can expedite that, then I'm happy to host a community meeting as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. Just a couple questions. The soil in Bolton is clay. It doesn't absorb the water very well. How would that work?
There's lots of parts of Peel that are clay. Bramalea is heavily clay as well. I think the key point is, do you want, by disconnecting it out of your foundation drain, it helps the resident prevent themselves from self-flooding themselves. So you're better off to get it onto the lawn and then let the natural drainage of the area take it away versus putting it in your basement. You're right, clay certainly does not absorb to the same extent, but we've got lots of pockets in Peel with clay. And, you know, the north and south hill of Bolton have historically had different issues regarding the clay up there. And as you know, in Bolton, there's lots of reverse driveways as well. And
Right.
unfortunately, those reverse driveways have a tendency of wanting to fill up during heavy storms. So part of it is trying to get the water away from the house. And that's the intent of the disconnection program,
Yeah.
regardless whether it's clay or sand or whatever.
Or some of those homes where the water is draining, it goes on the driveway, down the driveway into the sewer system.
Yep, and you know, that we're trying to get the stormwater where it belongs, is in the stormwater system. Unfortunately, the stormwater systems that have historically been designed for years have been designed on a 5 to 10 year storm frequency. Unfortunately, we're seeing 100-year storms in pockets on an annual basis, not every 100 years anymore.
Right.
And that's something we're working with the conservation area municipalities to say, how do you deal with that? You're not going to design a storm system for a 100-year storm, obviously, because the size is tremendous. But how can you better manage that overland flow to get it to the tributaries where it's all trying to get to?
Right, and we have an area, as you know, in Bolton, downtown Bolton, it's in the floodplain. So I think that area might be a little bit tricky, and we certainly need to work with the conservation on it to figure out how we're going to do it.
Yes, no, I fully agree.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Toby.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a sort of a general comment for some of my newer colleagues. We have clay down in my ward as well, but we 3 years ago we did a bioswale project down on 2 streets, and Councillor Unica has a beautiful one in his ward as well. And we've got all kinds of monitors down, phosphorus monitors, timers, flow gauges, all kinds of things. And during the July 8th storm, the bioswales absorbed 40% of the water that hit the street. And this is in clay as well. So they worked tremendously well. Those 2 streets did not get flooded, and yet the adjacent streets did. And the residents firmly believe that the bioswales had considerably amount to do with that. The thing that really surprised me about it was that the water that entered the bioswales didn't enter the traditional storm system for an additional 45 minutes. So that's like taking cars off the 401 at rush hour. So you're creating capacity. So one of the things I would really like to see is, for example, we just did new sewer lines on Hampton Crescent down in my ward. We ripped the whole street up. It's still ripped up. And to me, if we're going to be looking at doing those types of, we should work closer with the area municipalities and the Conservation Authority to say, okay, if we're going to go in, we have to dig this street up anyway, and it already has ditches, and it already has a history of flooding. Like this street was flooded, it's been flooded 4 or 5 times in the last decade, then that's the opportunity for us to come in and implement a bioswale system while we're at it. The other thing the city of Mississauga did is, starting in 2016, we have a stormwater charge. So people are going to be charged. The large users are going to be charged, per square meter. The difference in that is that we're currently getting about $4.25 million off the property tax to put towards low impact development, flood mitigation, and replacement of our storm system, because we're going to a per square meter charge. We're going to be bringing in approximately $27 million a year. We have a bylaw that's very specific that money can only be used for low impact development, replacement of our storm system, and flood mitigation. So it's a really good way of raising funds to be able to address this issue, because this is the climate has changed. The weather is weird now, and that's just the way it is. And we really have a responsibility to our residents to make sure that we prepare for the future as best we can.
Well said. If Councillor Groves, would you move a motion to receive the delegation, seconded by Councillor Unica? All in favor? Carried. And then we'll bring forward the recommendation, 11.6, I believe it is. Councillor Tovey, if you'd be kind enough to move that, and seconded by Councillor Fonseca. All in favor then of the recommendations? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. That moves us to our next delegation. Kim Sepp, Treasurer and Spokesperson, your voice for Bolton regarding Regional Official Plan Amendment number 28, ROPA 28, request for facilitation. Welcome, Kim. And as you know, this was discussed in some length at the last council meeting, so if you could be as brief as possible, would be greatly appreciated.
Mr. Chairman, a point of order. Since this matter was dealt with the last meeting and a resolution was passed, do we have to reopen the issue now to discuss this matter again?
No, it was deferred, so we don't have to reopen it. It's-
Oh, I thought that we had a recorded vote here, and
I'll ask the clerk to explain.
The recorded vote was on the deferral,
oh, is it different? And
so the motion is on the table.
so it passed
The
the
deferral passed.
deferral passed?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the clarification.
No problem. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Dale, members of Regional Council. Please bear with me, as public speaking is not my regular business, so I'm naturally a little bit nervous to be before you. As mentioned, my name is Kimberly Seipt, a resident of the town of Caledon and treasurer of Your Voice for Bolton, being the appellant of ROPA 28, the Bolton employment expansion. I'm also the sole appellant of the ministerial zoning order for the new Canadian Tire Distribution Centre, and our community group fully supports this appeal. Lastly, I'm a mother of 3 and a small business person who has lived in Bolton for 11 years. My husband and I built our home in 2004, and we laid our roots in the community and have been actively involved since then. Today, I'm joined by members of our group, including our chair, Henry Corradini, and our vice chair, Joe Agia. So I'd just like to bring your attention to those that are here. If you could stand up for me. Our group is a real grassroots effort that formed shortly after the MZO was issued, but many of us have been advocating for the last 10 years for proper planning in Caledon and in particular Bolton. It is important to note that ROPA 28 includes the MZO lands, and this makes them interrelated. Planning decisions have long-term consequences for the residents of our community. We want to ensure that Bolton and Caledon has the best possible future ahead of it. The issues surrounding the South Albion lands originated in 2004 and has cost the town and the region considerable financial expense. These issues involve a number of different players, and they have delayed much-needed progress in Bolton for over a decade. This includes jobs and municipal revenue. In this week's Caledon Enterprise newspaper, Mayor Alan Thompson was quoted saying, Is it that regional councillors simply don't understand that Caledon's planning is much different than any other municipality's planning? With the greatest amount of respect, Mayor Thompson, the only difference in Caledon's planning, it appears to be based on popularity or special interest and not based on sound planning, policy, or fiscal responsibility. Attitudes like these are precisely why we find ourselves constantly at the OMB incurring costs and delays which are completely unnecessary, not to mention growth which isn't sustainable, costing us, the taxpayers, millions of dollars. It is my hope that today Regional Council will allow our community to move forward and permit us to facilitate a positive solution. During this entire exhaustive planning process, our group has stubbornly clung to the belief that our voices will be heard and acted upon. I can say that there is now an opportunity for the public to have a meaningful seat at the table in finding a resolution to these issues since the mandated public process is now completed. Therefore, I'm here today to set the record straight and tell members of Regional Council we support facilitation as a means of resolving our concerns. It is worth a try. I was unable to attend the last Regional Council meeting, but I did listen to the presentation and debate online. I was completely shocked to hear that our town councillors are supporting a residential expansion with $100 million price tag. Our group is demanding mixed-use expansion, just like Mayfield West is getting, not a piecemeal plan, which is currently the case with Bolton's expansion areas. Segmenting employment and residential expansion is just not sensible planning and surely not the essence of places to grow policies. Our group is especially disappointed in Councillor Groves, who has always supported mixed-use development in South Bolton, but now appears to encourage expensive OMB hearings, fiscally irresponsible residential growth, and refusing to allow our group to facilitate a positive solution for the community. Councillor Groves, you're sitting here today as a regional councillor in part because members
Excuse
of our...
me, but I don't think we should get into personalities and just deal with the issue, please.
Okay. Today we have 2 options as the public, to facilitate or expensive OMB hearings. I was also personally offended that Mayor Thompson would suggest that we did not prepare the MZO appeal ourselves or that we were aided by a developer. This is completely false and offensive, and I would ask that you retract those statements. The truth is, another resident who is not here today but watching from home and I stayed up until the wee hours of the morning, the days following the issuance of the MZO, researching the proper forms online and filling them out to complete the revoke request. Lastly, I was shocked at the sudden interest in public opinion when our voices, numbered in the hundreds, were completely drowned out during several public processes and during the decision-making related to ROPA 28 and the NZO from both town and regional councils. Our group of volunteers have worked incredibly hard to get the truth out and explain what is at stake for Bolton's future. The truth is we are fighting for the betterment of our community, and to suggest anything else is wrong and quite frankly, is offensive to the devoted members of our group. This is not a popularity contest or political launching pad for re-election. This is a serious, complicated matters which have ended up at the OMB, and we have now been given an opportunity to facilitate a positive outcome. In a recent news story, our mayor, Alan Thompson, was interviewed and said the grey concrete jungle in South Bolton needs to get fixed, and that Bolton should lead in city building with complete communities, and Caledon should be leading with its planning instead of handing money to consultants and lawyers. But yet here we are, arguing not in favor of facilitating, which has the large potential of avoiding unnecessary costs. The truth appears to be that Caledon councillors prefer OMB appeals with extraordinary public expense, since this is exactly what they have done for as long as I have been involved. I have with me 3 letters that were handed out, I believe, by Stephanie earlier. Between former Mayor Morrison and former Minister Shirelli. Mr. Shirelli tried to encourage facilitation back in 2013. These letters show a disturbing pattern which demonstrates the unwillingness to involve multiple parties to the table for a real resolution. This pattern is one of promoting special interest for development while refusing to participate in resolving the broader land use issues. This is a terrible track record and one which we should not permit to continue at this time. Last week's presentation proved many things to our group. It proved logic and fiscal responsible planning related to Bolton's expansion areas has not been the focus of this ongoing process. The truth is our group and its efforts have been strongly supported by the broader community. Hundreds of signed petitions attending our 3 rallies and social media outreach proves the community supports us. Again, facilitation means better planning for Bolton's employment and expansion area and is represented by the public since we are at the table. It also saves us costs we cannot afford and finally address our valid concerns properly. To be clear, our group were the only members of public who appealed the expansion, and we are real members of the public. Our community deserves more than warehousing. We deserve a proper community plan with prestige employment uses and mixed-use development, which does not have a $100 million price tag attached to it. Our group questions the logic behind the choices made by Town Council, and Caledon's own official plan states this pattern of growth will focus development in the south of the town away from sensitive environmental areas of the Niagara Escarpment in the west and the Oak Ridges Marine in the north, especially when fiscal costs of such growth are exorbitant. We support ensuring that we have a live-work expansion area no matter who the developer is. In fact, we would say it doesn't matter who the landowner is at all. To conclude, some may suggest that our group is approximately 30 active members is small or not meaningful. As quoted by Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ennis.
Thank you, Chair Dale. Thank you, Ms. Stout, for coming to present today. I want to commend you on taking time away from your family and doing what you feel you need to do for members of the community. So thank you very much. I would like to ask, you made a comment with regards to the planning process being not that much different than Mississauga or Brampton. And I don't want to use the exact words because I can't remember specifically what you said, but you had mentioned that the only relative difference is political. I don't want to use the exact words because I'm not sure exactly what you said. But on that note, I would like to ask our planning staff if they could briefly outline the differences between the planning processes in Caledon compared to the cities of Mississauga and Brampton, because it is my understanding that there is a substantial difference.
Yeah, David?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Arvin, could you perhaps just talk about the the regional official plan implications, so the urban areas and the difference that brings to planning.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, as I noted to council last week, the real major difference is in the planning process is the Places to Grow. The Places to Grow legislation came out in 2006. By that time, we had Mississauga mostly built out, and Brampton generally built out also. It was in terms of the designation of land for urban development. Brampton is now implementing that through growth. Through the thing with Caledon is we did, it was a rural area, generally with some rural service centers. The greenfield development that is being allocated to Caledon now has much more of a implication from the province, from Places to Grow, because they're now assigning growth numbers, and those growth numbers that the province is assigning is being implemented by regional planners and by area municipal planners. So it is a different process in that regard. The process has been scrutinized by the province, and we have to conform to Places to Grow. There's no two ways about it. It is not as much of a locally driven process as it has been historically in Peel, and what we have experienced in Mississauga and Brampton prior to Places to Grow.
Thank you. So to reiterate then that because the cities of Brampton and Mississauga's urban boundaries have been expanded to their geographical boundaries, the process is extremely different in Caledon because our urban boundaries for settlement are not expanded to our geographical boundaries. And that is what has created this process.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to Councillor Innes, that is absolutely correct. It's a different situation in Caledon because your urban boundaries are nowhere close to being expanded. And Mississauga, Brampton, in terms of a regional expansion of urban boundaries, it's done.
Thank you. My second question is with regards to your comment, Ms. Sept, about the hundreds of residents that had signed the petitions that you had sent forward. I just want clarification because it's my understanding that those petitions were specifically with regards to Canadian Tire, not growth.
The petitions were in regards to the MZO that were, well, prior to the MZO, were sent out before council made a decision on requesting the MZO. The issue related to ROPA 28 has come after that process, but the group still does agree with the appeal, because it's the group that has put the appeal in, on how those lands are being dealt with as we go forward.
I just wanted clarification so that the members of council sitting here understood that those residents that signed that petition were not signing the petition against how Caledon was doing its planning. They were solely signing that petition with regards to the MZO order for Canadian Tire.
That is true.
Thank you for coming today.
Just to clarify, the MZO lands are included in the ROPA 28 expansion, so they're interconnected from that perspective. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Crombie.
Well, I have a couple of questions, but I'm also interested in this planning process being different in Caledon now that Councillor Innes has raised it, because certainly Mississauga's gone through planning process. We're part of the Growth Act. We're subject to the Planning Act, and we do have more lands to expand. We have Ninth Line, we have Imperial Oil, we have Lakeview. So why is it, Arvin, please, how is it different in Caledon than it is in Brampton or Mississauga, and why isn't there a level playing field for everyone? I mean, we've all been through growth and through expansion. We've all had to be accountable and transparent, and the Planning Act applies to everybody.
Yes.
And so does the planning process and the Places to Grow Act.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, absolutely. The Planning Act has been around for a very long time. However, it's Places to Grow that allocates growth to all the municipalities in the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and the region has allocated that growth to our existing urban areas in the form of intensification and to new areas in the form of greenfield development. That's how it's different. It's really an allocation of growth, which region did not do in the past. That's the major difference. We are, through our official plan and through a process that we work with the area municipal planners to understand what your growth needs are and allocate growth accordingly. For example, in the last allocation process that we went through, Caledon has certain desires for growth. We actually had to curtail the numbers by about 5,000, I believe it was, 5,000 people in Caledon, so that we could have conformity with places to grow. So the process is different in the sense that now we have this provincial plan that we're working with.
I hear you. So the process itself isn't different. There's just new legislation. So really there shouldn't be any different rules. The process is not different. Arvin, last week we heard some concerning statements from your own planners about the way these areas for growth were selected. And they still concern me, but I'm going to let that go for now. But I'm still very concerned about what I heard about proper planning process not really being in place. That the regions selected, the communities selected for growth. All right. Okay.
Yeah,
Was
I'd
it?
caution you.
Was
Mayor.
it? Okay, I take it back. I'm going to just ask Kimberly a question then. How large is your group?
The broader group, those that support us on Facebook and those sorts of avenues.
How many? Yeah.
There's
How many?
about 250 on there. We have about 30 active that come to every meeting.
Okay, and how are you funded?
We have various sources. Myself and Henry have been putting a lot of our own financial resources into this, but the group members have all contributed. We had a gala. We have some businesses that have provided us support. There are a couple of landowners that live along Healy Road that have supported us as well.
And large developers as well?
No, no large developers.
Small developers?
If you consider those that live on Healy Road developers, I would imagine.
So this is a grassroots funded organization?
Absolutely.
Okay, just wondering. How close do you live to the industrial lands?
I live right on King Street, so a lot of the choice that's made from a warehousing perspective will affect me. Those trucks go by my house on a regular basis, and I live about 3 kilometers from the Canadian Tire facility.
And so last week we also heard that there was a desire for more industrial lands in that area, but you're suggesting to me that that's not the desire of the residents?
Our desire is to have prestige employment uses mixed with residential component to have a live-work community. We want to see the intensification of the employment use in the southern area so that we can curb the amount of truck use on the arterial roads that are existing right now because we do not have a highway system.
So you support mixed planning use,
Mixed planning.
residential combined with industrial
Absolutely.
use, and certainly that's what we advocate in Mississauga, so I certainly would support that. Where did you get the letters that you tabled today? Because they say confidential.
So originally, they were tabled at the town of Caledon at a council session. They were brought forward.
Okay.
But they were also obtained through the Freedom of Information package that our group filed. That was about 1,081 pages in total that came from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs.
It's just when I read these letters this morning, I found it quite concerning because what we're discussing today may have been resolved in 2013 if only the broader issue of all lands were taken to the facilitation back in 2013 rather than just the employment lands. Because certainly Mayor Morrison asks for the employment lands. Minister Shirelli responds and says, yes, we'd like all land issues to be considered by the facilitator. And then Mayor Morrison responds, no, we want you only to look at employment land use. I find that interesting because this is why we're here today, to resolve this issue. And you're telling me that you want residential, that the residents want more residential. They want mixed use.
And we want fiscally responsible planning.
And my final question is, what sort of public process have you gone through? What was the public consultation process like?
In regards to?
Just the planning of the area of
Planning of the
Bolton?
area? Well, it's a long process because it started with the South Albion plan. I think there's a bit of a history session that was given last week at the presentation, but basically the original South Albion plan contained both components of residential and employment uses. Then somehow they were delinked and only the employment lands were brought forward. At that time, I was involved in the chamber and did delegate this council chamber on that very issue, that the business community in Caledon felt very strongly that both components needed to be part of that expansion, and it was still chosen not to bring the residential component forward at that time.
Was there a thorough and comprehensive public consultation process?
There was for that process.
For which process? Employment or on the whole? Or
There was a consultative process for the South Albion plan. Then that, I don't know the details of why that came off the table. Then we ended up with population not being allocated to Bolton until 2021. That was taken to the Ontario Municipal Board. That was when it was determined that they were going to split the population and have 10,000 come to Bolton, and that initiated the BRES study, which is the Bolton Residential Expansion Study. And then we have choices that were made that put us at a $100 million infrastructure deficit. Now, it hasn't been brought forward.
that hasn't been voted on or
No.
anything yet. But my concern is just that I understand that there's a concern that there wasn't a thorough public consultation process.
As I mentioned in my delegation, the public was involved with the MZO process very intensely through 3 different public meetings that occurred. At one of the public meetings, we had OPP present and a moderator brought in where council didn't even answer any of the public's questions. So through this entire process, the public has felt muted from dealing with this issue. And
You know,
that
we're-
is
we're
why-
getting into debate, and
Okay, I'm
that's
just
not the
asking
purpose
if it
of
was
this
thorough
part
and
of the meeting.
comprehensive and
In the eyes of council, they think it was thorough. In the eyes of the public, we felt we were shut out.
you didn't have that opportunity. Thank you for your responses.
And I would ask that members of council not get into debate with the delegate and just ask questions if you have any, but keep it for clarification only. Thank you. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I will only speak to or ask for clarification. Kim, thank you for coming and delegating today and for the support of our community that's here as well. I was involved with the MZO process and the, I guess it's the fight against Canadian Tire and its location in such close proximity to where people live. Before the group was even formed, we were out there knocking on doors and taking those petitions, so I was part of that process and still support that. And just for clarification, Kim, the BRES, which is the Bolton Residential Expansion Study, hasn't gone to a public meeting yet, and certainly I was not involved in that process. That is the study that is being debated with the $100 million. I was not part of council at the time when council chose the site, and it hasn't gone through a public process yet. I think when it goes through the public process, and through you, Mr. Chair, planning staff can correct me if I'm wrong, that's when there's an opportunity to come out, voice those concerns, and express the concerns about where maybe the location and the cost. But it's also my understanding that the cost will be borne by the developers there, that it would be no cost to the region. So, Arvind, I'm not sure if you can clarify if that's the right process or what's happening with that.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I think Councillor Groves has it right. The BRES has not gone through a planning process in the form of a public meeting, which is a statutory requirement of the Planning Act. There will also be public open houses, so there will be ample opportunity for public input.
Okay, thank you. And I think we all of the members that are here from Caledon Council has committed to making sure that the public is fully engaged in the process when determining if this is the right location or whatever else the issues are that would surround that particular expansion. So I will be making sure that when the opportunity arises for the public consultation, that I put out the communication that's necessary to engage them and for them to come out and have their say in that. And I think at that point is where we debate that issue. So again, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Councillor Sprovieri.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Kim, for being dedicated to your community. It's really, you don't find too many people like you in society that take so much time to make sure things are done right. But I just want to make a comment on your comments, and perhaps you can respond if you like. You mentioned that mixed-use development is really desirable, and that's the way of the future, and that's the way this area should be developed. And now, I've been involved in development. My ward was 8,000 people. Today, it's 140,000 people. The last 25 years, Ward 9 and 10. So we've done it all. We've done the commercial, industrial, office. Everything's been done in the area. Now, from my understanding, good planning is that mixed-use development is really desirable when you have the proper mixed use. That is, residential, commercial, and office. You want it to have it in the same mixed. But when it comes to industrial and residential, that is not a good mix. You don't want to have a factory here and some residents next door and then all over the place. That is not very good, and people don't like that. And I'm sure that I remember the reason why you came to us originally about Canadian Tire was that you felt Canadian Tire was too close to the residential area of Bolton, and that's where you live, and that's why your group was opposing the Canadian Tire plant, because it was too close to the residential, and you felt that that would be an impact. So I have to say that when you do planning...
Councilor Spurrier, have you got a question?
Yeah, so do you believe that proper planning is done with a comprehensive official plan exercise or a secondary plan exercise where everything is looked at, all the possibilities? Or do you believe that in this case we should do it on a piecemeal type of exercise where just somebody says, I think that factories and residential are okay to be together?
Well, to clarify, what we have always advocated for was complete community planning and not piecemeal planning. Right. So by having an employment expansion without the residential component, that is delinking those two pieces. And we are asking for them to be brought together. What our community group does not want to see is a warehouse distribution hub at the southern end of Bolton. We believe that we have the opportunity to make sure that that does not happen. Because I don't know about you, but if you were already existing and living in Bolton, I don't think that you would want to see your area bombarded by trucks and distribution. And that is the reason why we want to see proper planning. We do not want to see just warehouse and distribution.
And I have to say that is a very valid point. The only thing I have to say about that is, do you want to see the employment at the north end of Caledon, and so that all the trucks have to go through the residential? No. Or do you want to see it at the south end, along Mayfield, where then the trucks don't invade the community?
Councilor Spurrier, we're getting into debate again.
Well, I'm asking the question whether, where's a better place to put the employment, to the north or to the south?
It's not clarification, though.
May I just speak?
Okay.
No, I'm going to ask that you don't respond to that.
Okay.
And move on.
Well, actually, the planner probably would be a better person to respond to that question. Mr. Chairman, if I can ask Mr. Roussad.
It's not really a point of clarification, so it's more...
Okay, that's fine.
Councilor Yanika. And I'll caution you, too, before you speak.
Well, I think I'm forewarned, and so I think you'll be proud of me. And I appreciate that, and rightly so. But I want to follow up on John's question, because I think there's a question in there. And again, the fundamental contradictions I'm running into. Believe in sound planning, long-term planning, et cetera, et cetera. And to our planning commissioner, so is the pinnacle of sound planning an MZO?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the provincial policy, the planning legislation and policy framework provide many opportunities, many tools for sound planning. A minister's zoning order is in the toolbox. Municipalities can use a minister's zoning order through the, through the cooperation of the Minister's office to make that as an instrument to achieve the goals that a municipality wishes to see achieve.
I'm not asking you if. I'm asking you if you believe it's sound planning as the member of this council who for 26 years has allowed more development than anyone, and I've never had cause to use it, and Mississauga didn't
Actually,
use it when we
Councilor,
brought...
I don't think it's...
There's a question there, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I don't
Does
know
he
if it's
believe in his
relevant, though.
professional opinion that it's sound planning? Or else we could use far more of them as far as I'm concerned. Maybe I should... Would you welcome us using more of them? You are a planner, I believe.
Well, through you, Mr. Chairman, the particular proposal, the Canadian Tire proposal, was part of the 609 hectares that was to be brought in for employment purposes. It was identified. So if the minister's zoning order is one way to achieve that, to keep jobs in our community, then yes, it's sound planning.
Next question. With regards, going back to the ministries in the province of Ontario, did that site conform to the 50 jobs per hectare? In fact, can you point to any site up in Ballotton and Caledon that conforms to the ordered 50 jobs per hectare?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the requirement, for the performance requirement for Caledon is actually 42 jobs, people and jobs per hectare. It's a regional requirement for 50 jobs, people and jobs per hectare, and that requirement is measured across a regional basis, not on a site-specific, site-by-site basis. We are performing on a regional basis. If the development plans that we have come forth, we will be achieving, actually achieving greater than 50 jobs, people and jobs per hectare. So,
Mr. Chairman, I need an explanation of that as to how you build warehouses, and you're telling me you come to Mississauga, we say don't build a warehouse. I'm confused, Mr. Chairman. I need an explanation of what was just said to me. What are you going to do and build in Bolton and that's going to counterbalance the amount you're below 42 per hectare here? What's coming?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we don't just look at the industrial development by itself. It's a combined density across the region that we're looking at. So if you have high density development, you have medium density development, or in fact, if you have development such as in Mayfield West, which is exceeding the requirements of the province of 52, that's contributing or offsetting the reduction in employment that is happening through employment density.
So I just want to be, so are you telling me then that my constituents in the downtown core of Mississauga have to pay for less than what should be taken up to the north? Is that what you're telling me?
No, that's not what I'm telling you.
So where will it come from then? I'm at a loss. You've just said it's region-wide. I'm part of region-wide, and I issue more building permits than anybody. I'm assuming I'm part of the countervailing number, or am I not? Or else, where does it come from?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm specifically talking about the density requirement, and your question was whether we would achieve that. And what I'm saying is the Caledon requirement is 42, and you can't look at it on a site-by-site basis. So you can't say whether the Canadian Tire lands meet that density requirement or not, because everything contributes towards that 42.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, that's the best. I need that to come back, and I see some of those numbers, and here's what's proposed here, but here's what's proposed over there, and that'll all balance out. The next question I have is, and it's something that was brought up at the last meeting, and I thought it was very, very appropriate, when Mayor Thompson said, you know, developers don't tell us how to develop. I have a question for our planner and our lawyer as well. I mean, I've been duped for 26 years because here's the problem I have. For 26 years, between provincial legislation, developers, lawyers, our own planners, and the OMB, I've been told how to develop for 26 years. How is it that you feel you're devoid of that in Caledon and you don't have to pay any attention to them? And why have I been lying to my constituents for 26 years, saying the board decided it's provincial legislation, our planners said it's appropriate planning? What do I go back and tell them? I guess. I'll leave I think it's rhetorical. Last point I want to make is, in fairness to the mayor, a question again to come back from staff. Madam Mayor, you did reference something that was said was in camera. In fairness, it was said in your boardroom at a meeting that you had, and I'm going to let that question stand because the question was to our staff again, that, and I put the question, that if this
it was discussed in camera.
No, I'm talking about a meeting the mayor had in her office. And that's where I received information, and that's not in camera, and I think I have the right to share information that I receive from our staff. And what and Mr. Chairman, I'll be very charitable and say the following, and I think I have the right to say it. When I asked our staff if the planning and the servicing cost of what we are discussing is best practices, let's just say they didn't say yes. Mr. Chairman, I'll be charitable and leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Otherwise, I would have moved in camera. Councillor Carlson.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Just to help me with a bit of clarity through you to Arvin, the difference between the planning processes that, as you described, if I understand between the cities, what we've seen and what Caledon, how it operates, basically has to do with an urban boundary issue that comes to the region, right? I'm not putting words in your mouth, but that's kind of all I'm hearing. Am I missing something?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the biggest difference has been the places to grow.
Right.
2006. Coming, new rules about intensification, growth, allocation of growth, and so forth. We've always had a regional urban boundary. Brampton has had to expand that urban boundary. That was the last recent expansion, the big one that brought Northwest Brampton in.
I remember.
So that's a planning process we've always had. But the biggest difference is the requirements of places to grow around intensification, around the density that we just talked about, and policies around growth and growth management.
Well, the follow-up to that is that even within those constraints, is it true to say that the general principles of good planning, best practices, mixed uses, compatibility, separation, all the things that we, for better or for worse, have tried to deal with in Mississauga, that would apply to Caledon, and indeed every municipality in Ontario, I would assume? There's not really that much difference in how we develop a community. You're talking about timing in this case, or urban boundary and meeting provincial goals. But once we've settled all that, the actual planning process, more or less the same. Am I right?
Well, the planning process is not the same because of the fact that we have, the provincial process and various layers of planning processes now. But the principles of good planning are still the same.
Okay.
And the principles of good planning talk about many of the things you just talked about. It's embodied in the Planning Act and the provincial provincial policy statement. So those have been there, they're still there.
And then through you, Mr. Chair, to delegate today, you are talking about a mixed-use approach, which I think I understand, at least it's in principle very similar to what we've been doing. Well, your request for facilitation is to go and move towards this pretty standard model that you feel has been lacking in your dealings with the town of Caledon. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I think we're not debating it yet, but thank you very much for clarifying that, because that's the only type of planning I even understand. So I appreciate your taking the opportunity to explain that to us. Thank you.
Thank you. If we could have someone be kind enough to move Councillor Grove's receipt of the delegation, seconded by Councillor Yanika. All in favor? Carried. Just on a point of order, the clerk received correspondence letter from Solmar's solicitor, I believe it is. Yeah. It's a brief one. I'm going to ask that it be distributed, and if just on a point of order, if somebody could move amendment to the agenda so that we could include that on the agenda. Normally, we would put it on the next council meeting, but I don't want to get into debate again in a month from now. So moved by Councillor Parrish and seconded by Councillor Starr. All in favor then of receipt of the correspondence? Or that it be added to the agenda? Carried. Thanks. I have a motion moved by Mayor Jeffrey and seconded by Councillor Moore that I will read for the benefit of the audience and council. We'll put it up on the screen as well. We'll move this. It says, whereas regional council meetings have included the reciting. Oh, that's the wrong one. That'll be all right. Yeah, I should. It's actually a motion moved by Mayor Jeffrey and seconded by Mayor Crombie. Whereas the Region of Peel, as one of Canada's largest and most diverse communities, is an important hub of economic activity representing approximately 10% of all business in Ontario. And whereas, according to the Region of Peel's 2015 federal pre-budget submission, the regional unemployment rate remains stubbornly high at 8.2%, and its youth unemployment rate even more so at 17.6% in comparison to the Canadian unemployment rate of 6.8%. And whereas economic growth, employment creation, and increased revenues are vital to the future sustainability of the Region of Peel. And whereas according to the Region of Peel's own consultants, Watson and Associates Economists Limited, the Bolton Employment Expansion Area, ROPA 28, and Mayfield West 2 Expansion Area, ROPA 29, collectively will have a potential net impact of delivering up to 11,000 permanent jobs to the Region of Peel. And ROPA 28 and ROPA 29 collectively will generate close to $4 million in tax revenue for the Region of Peel. And ROPA 28 and ROPA 29 will generate close to $155 million in development charges. And whereas the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, in a letter dated April 14th, 2015, encourages the parties to consider using the services of the Provincial Development Facilitator, therefore be it resolved that the Regional Council encourages all affected landowners, the Region of Peel, and the Town of Caledon to work with the Provincial Development Facilitator to discuss long-standing use issues associated with ROPA 28 and ROPA 29. And I have a list. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple, I guess, of housekeeping for members of council here. We have two hearings, pre-hearings happening right now. We've got the ROPA 29, which is, I believe, is to be dealt with on April the 30th. And I think we have another pre-hearing coming up sometime in May, and I'm not quite sure what those dates are. So I guess what I'm having some challenges with on...
Councillor Groves, I think before we do that, I'm going to ask that someone move a motion to move us into camera so we can get some legal advice with respect to that. So it's moved by Mayor Thompson, seconded by Councillor Tovey.